It was a quiet evening when Kendra Woods received the call that would change her life forever. Her brother Jamal was dead, shot by a racist cop during a routine traffic stop. The police claimed it was a mistake, but Kendra knew better. This wasn't just a mistake, it was murder. What happens when a sister decides to take justice into her own hands? Stay tuned, because the story that follows is one of revenge, courage, and unrelenting justice. But before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to this channel for more gripping stories just like this one. Trust me, you won't want to miss the twist coming up. The news came like a slap to the face. Kendra Woods stood frozen in the living room of her cramped apartment, her phone pressed to her ear. The voice on the other end was shaking, but Kendra couldn't focus on the words. All she could hear was the ringing in her ears, the pulse in her temples, the way her heart felt like it was being crushed beneath the weight of what she had just learned. Kendra, it's Jamal. The voice paused, and Kendra could hear the faint sobs through the phone. He's gone. Kendra's hand went to her mouth, her breath catching in her throat. It felt like her world had just shattered. Jamal, her only brother, the one person she had always protected and loved, gone. And worse, it wasn't an accident. The officer on the other end, Detective Angela Richards, sounded like she was trying to hold it together. But Kendra wasn't listening to her now. She could barely comprehend the details, only that her brother had been shot dead by a police officer during a routine traffic stop. A racist cop had decided that Jamal's presence in the wrong neighborhood was enough of a reason to pull him over, and the situation escalated in an instant. No, Kendra choked, her voice cracking with the raw emotion of shock and anger. You're lying. This can't be real. My brother is dead? Just like that? I'm sorry, Kendra. The detective's voice was quiet, full of empathy. It was Officer Richard Sloan. He shot Jamal. There's an investigation, but he's gone. Kendra dropped the phone, her hand shaking violently. Jamal, her baby brother, was dead, taken from her by someone who had sworn to protect, not harm. But she knew it wasn't an accident. It was a murder, and it wasn't the first time it had happened. Her mind began to swirl with memories of the conversations they'd had, the struggles he'd faced growing up in a world that never gave him a chance. She couldn't sit still. The rage inside her started to grow. Her brother's life was stolen, and the officers who were supposed to be the ones keeping order had let it happen. Kendra was not the type to sit by and let things go. She had always been the protector, the fighter. But today was different. She had no more time for the usual channels. The law, the system, they had failed her brother. They had failed her family, and she wasn't going to let them fail anyone else. She slammed the phone down and grabbed her coat. She had no plan, no clear path. But one thing was certain, she was going to make the officer pay. Justice wasn't about waiting for slow investigations and endless red tape. Justice was about action, and Kendra was ready to take it into her own hands. The streets of Kingsley City were quiet that evening, a strange, uneasy calm hanging in the air. As Kendra made her way to the car, the news of her brother's death already started to spread. The protests, the anger, the chants, it was only a matter of time. But for Kendra, the rage she felt wasn't just for her brother. It was for every black man and woman who had been unjustly hurt, for every single person who had faced the scorn of a racist system that never saw them as human. She had no interest in waiting for the justice system to work for her. It had failed her before. It had failed Jamal. It was time to take things into her own hands. She would find Officer Richard Sloan, the officer who had taken everything from her, and she would make him feel the same pain, the same fear that her brother had felt that night. Her mind raced with ideas as she navigated the streets, heading toward the police station. Richard Sloan. She knew him. She had seen his name plastered on headlines before. He was a big name in Kingsley's police department, known for his aggressive tactics and his racially charged views. He was someone who thought he was untouchable, but he wouldn't be untouchable anymore. As Kendra reached the station, she slowed down, watching the front entrance, her hands tight on the wheel. She had nothing but fury in her heart. She wasn't going to back down, no matter how dangerous it was. Tonight, it would be her turning the tables. The street was relatively empty, but the police station wasn't far from the city's busiest strip. There would be witnesses, cameras, but Kendra didn't care. Her brother's blood was on their hands, and it was time for her to make them pay. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she almost ignored it, but something told her to check it. It was a text from Marcus, one of the leaders in the local activist community. I heard about Jamal. We've got your back. Stay strong. We'll do this the right way together. The message made her pause, her fingers hovering over the screen. The sentiment was comforting, but Kendra knew that her fight couldn't wait. Jamal was dead. She was done waiting for answers. She didn't respond to Marcus. Instead, she tossed her phone aside and pulled up to the police station. She parked a few blocks away, heart pounding in her chest as she stepped out of the car. There was a rush of adrenaline, the kind that came with the realization that she was no longer just a sister seeking justice. She was now part of something bigger. The shadows of the night clung to the edges of the station. Kendra moved swiftly, blending into the dark alleyway behind the building. She knew the layout of the place. She had studied it, memorized it. The back door was her only way in. As she approached, her breathing was steady, but every nerve in her body was on high alert. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of what she was about to do. She had no idea what would happen when she stepped inside, what kind of chaos she would face, but one thing was for sure: Officer Sloan was going to feel the consequences of his actions. She paused for a moment, staring up at the building. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about taking back control, for Jamal, for every victim of this system. Kendra moved quickly through the alley, each step carefully measured. The cool night air bit at her skin, but the adrenaline coursing through her veins kept her warm. She had one goal in mind: justice. She wasn't going to wait any longer for a system that had failed her brother. Not when Sloan was still free, still out there, still thinking he could do whatever he wanted. The back door of the police station was just ahead. Kendra's hands were steady despite the storm raging inside her. She had to be quick. She had no idea what kind of security measures were in place, but she wasn't afraid. Fear had left her when they shot her brother. Now it was rage that guided her steps. The door was locked. She pulled out a small tool from her pocket, a simple lock-picking set she had learned to use over the past few weeks. It wasn't the first time she had done something like this, but tonight was different. Tonight, the consequences of failure were too great to consider. She had to succeed. After a few seconds of working the lock, it clicked. She gently pushed the door open, the creaking sound almost deafening in the silence of the night. Kendra slipped inside, closing the door behind her with barely a sound. The hallway in front of her was dimly lit, a few flickering lights casting shadows on the walls. She moved silently, keeping to the edges, staying out of sight. Kendra had learned everything she could about the station's layout over the last few days. She knew the building well enough now to navigate it like she had been there 100 times. Officer Sloan's office was at the far end of the hall, but before she could make her way there, she had to be sure there was no one else in the station. The quiet was unsettling. It felt like the calm before a storm, like the world had stopped just for her. She couldn't afford any more delays. She needed to find him. Sloan had to face what he had done. Alyssa was gone because of him. Jamal was gone because of him. Her heart hammered in her chest as she crept through the hallway. The sound of her breathing echoed too loudly in her ears, and she forced herself to focus. Stay calm. She had to stay in control. The urgency of the situation made her nervous, but she kept her cool. Just as she turned the corner, she froze. A police officer walked past the hallway, seemingly unaware of her presence. Her breath caught in her throat. Kendra pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath. The officer paused for a moment, his boots clacking against the floor as he turned toward the hallway, but he didn't notice her. She remained perfectly still, her back pressed against the cold concrete. The officer eventually moved on, and Kendra exhaled slowly, her hands shaking. She wasn't sure how much longer she could stay calm. She had one shot at this, one chance to make sure Sloan couldn't escape the consequences of his actions. The thought of her brother's lifeless body, of the cold gunshot that had ended his life, fueled her every move. She continued down the hallway, finally reaching the door to Sloan's office. The name plaque on the door read, Officer Richard Sloan in bold letters. Kendra reached for the handle, but before she could open it, she heard voices coming from down the hall. Shit. She quickly stepped back into the shadows, her pulse racing. 2 officers walked past, laughing and talking. They didn't see her, but she had no time to waste. If they caught her now, all of this would be for nothing. She waited until they were out of earshot, then returned to the door. This was it. Kendra took a deep breath and opened the door to Sloan's office. The lights were off, but the glow of his computer screen illuminated the room. It was a small, nondescript office with a few files scattered on the desk. Kendra quickly scanned the room, but there was no sign of Sloan. She moved to the desk and began to look through the papers, her hands moving with purpose. Where was he? The file she was holding slipped out of her hands as she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. Her heart jumped into her throat as she quickly scanned the room for somewhere to hide. There was no time. She grabbed the nearest item, a chair, and silently pushed it against the door. Bang! The door rattled as it was pushed from the other side. Her blood ran cold as she looked around, her options narrowing. There was nowhere to go. There was no way out. The footsteps grew louder. Kendra's mind raced, and her eyes darted from corner to corner. She was trapped in the same building as the very man who had taken her brother's life. The weight of the moment hit her all at once, but she couldn't afford to freeze. She had to move. Sloane's footsteps were right outside now. Kendra could feel her body tense, ready for action. She had no choice but to face him, to confront the monster who had ripped her family apart. The door handle turned. Now or never. Kendra's body moved before her mind could catch up. She rushed toward the door, her hand wrapping around the gun she had hidden in her jacket. As the door opened, she pushed it open hard, surprising the officer on the other side. Sloane stood there, his eyes wide in shock, his hand already reaching for his weapon. But before he could make a move, Kendra pushed him back into the office. "What do you think you're doing?" Sloane spat, trying to regain his footing. Kendra's hand tightened on the gun, her heart pounding, but her eyes were cold. "You took everything from me, Sloane. Everything. Now it's your turn to pay." Sloane reached for his gun, but Kendra was quicker. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the office, the bullet missing its target by inches. She didn't need to shoot him, but she needed him to know. She needed him to know exactly what it felt like to face the consequences of his actions. The gunshot echoed in the small office, the noise reverberating off the walls like the thunder of a coming storm. Kendra's hand was steady as she lowered the weapon. Watching as Officer Sloane staggered back, his face pale, eyes wide in disbelief. His hand hovered over the gun holstered at his side, but he didn't make a move. He didn't want to test her. He knew, just as Kendra knew, that the power balance in this room had shifted. "Don't move." Kendra's voice was a quiet command, but there was nothing calm about it. The fury inside her was burning through her words, through her veins. There was a sense of urgency now, a need to make him understand the gravity of the moment. "You killed my brother." The words were like a weight in her chest, but she forced them out. She was past grief now. It had been replaced by something stronger, something more dangerous. Justice, retribution. Sloane swallowed hard, trying to regain his composure. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, but there was nowhere for him to go. This room had become his prison. Kendra had locked him in, not just physically, but with the weight of his actions. She had come for him, and now she was in control. He slowly raised his hands in a defensive gesture. It was a mistake. His voice cracked slightly, betraying the fear he tried to hide. "I didn't mean." "Shut up." Kendra's voice was cold, cutting through his words like a knife. "You didn't mean to. You didn't mean to kill my brother. Do you think that matters now? You think I care about your excuses?" Sloane opened his mouth to speak again, but Kendra's eyes flashed with an intensity that silenced him immediately. He wasn't dealing with an innocent, confused woman anymore. He was dealing with someone who had nothing left to lose, someone who had lost it all, someone willing to go to the extreme for the justice her brother never got. Kendra stepped closer to him, the gun still in her hand but lowered now, pointing to the floor. It wasn't the gun she needed. It was the truth she was after, and she was going to make him see it. "You thought you could do this and get away with it, didn't you?" Kendra's words were full of disdain. She paced in front of him, her body rigid with anger. She could feel the years of trauma bubbling to the surface, years of discrimination, years of being silenced by a system that made excuses for people like Sloane. And in that moment she knew something had to change. No more excuses, no more lies. She stopped in front of him, her voice low, dangerous. "I'm not here to make you suffer. I'm here to make you understand what you've done." Sloane shifted nervously on his feet, but he was cornered. There was no way out. He was no longer the officer who held power. He was just a man facing the consequences of his actions. Kendra took a deep breath, her eyes locking onto his. "What makes you think you can kill a young black man and not pay for it?" Her tone was steely now, focused. "What makes you think you can break his family apart without anyone noticing?" Sloane's chest heaved as he tried to find words, but he couldn't form them. His bravado from earlier had evaporated into thin air, leaving him only with the crushing reality of what he had done. "The system will protect me." Sloane finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "The system always protects its own." Kendra's lips curled into a mocking smile. "You're right, Sloane. The system does protect people like you, but you've underestimated one thing." Sloane's eyes narrowed, confusion written across his face. "What's that?" Kendra stepped closer to him, so close that she could feel his breath. "It doesn't protect you from me." Her eyes hardened, her voice cold as ice. "And you should have never underestimated what a mother, a sister, a daughter can do when they've had enough." The words sank in, and in that instant, Sloane realized that Kendra wasn't here for a trial, wasn't here for the police or the justice system. She wasn't waiting for a settlement or a compromise. She was done waiting. The gun in her hand was no longer a threat. It was just a reminder of what she had taken from him. The power he thought he held in that badge, the authority he believed came with it, was now gone. She was in control. Sloane's breathing quickened, his eyes darting nervously. He could see the determination in Kendra's eyes. He could feel the weight of his own guilt pressing down on him. But as much as he wanted to beg for mercy, he knew he couldn't escape the consequences. "You're going to walk out of here with your life, Sloane," Kendra said, her voice no longer a scream, but a calm, controlled fury. "But you'll remember tonight. You'll remember the family you destroyed, the life you took, and you'll remember that no matter how much you try to cover it up, no matter how much the system protects you, there will always be someone like me, someone who'll make sure the truth gets out." Kendra stepped back, lowering the gun completely. Sloane was left speechless, paralyzed by the weight of her words and the crushing reality of what had just unfolded. As Kendra turned toward the door, ready to leave, her eyes never left Sloane's. She didn't need to say anything more. She had already done what she came to do. Justice wasn't about retribution. It was about ensuring that the truth was never silenced again. The days after Marcus's visit passed in a blur of preparations and plans. Kendra met with lawyers, community leaders, and activists, all of whom rallied behind her and her fight for justice. But it wasn't just the legal battle she was preparing for. It was the personal war she knew she had to fight. Her emotions had settled into something colder now, more focused. She had started a movement, but now it was time to finish what she had started. The police investigation into her brother's death continued, but Kendra had no illusions about what would happen. She knew the system was designed to protect people like Officer Sloane, and she wasn't about to let the story be buried beneath more excuses, so she focused on the legal process, trusting in Marcus to guide her through it. Marcus had been relentless in his pursuit of justice. His team had gathered the evidence, the body cam footage, witness testimonies, and the documents that exposed Officer Sloane's record of misconduct. The case was strong, and Kendra was ready to fight. But there was a constant tension gnawing at her. What if it wasn't enough? What if they failed? What if Sloane walked free again? Her thoughts were interrupted one afternoon when she received a call from Detective Angela Richards. Kendra had already met her during the early stages of the investigation, and she had promised Kendra that she would stay involved. Despite the police department's flaws, Angela was one of the few officers Kendra could trust. "Kendra, we have a lead." Angela's voice was low, almost urgent. "It's big." Kendra felt her chest tighten. "What's going on?" "Sloane's been connected to a network." Angela paused, her voice lowering even further. "It's not just him. There are others in the department with a history of racial bias, people who've been involved in misconduct, but have never been held accountable." Kendra felt her breath catch in her throat. This wasn't just about Sloane anymore. This was bigger than her brother. This was about the system. "Are you telling me that this goes beyond Sloane?" Kendra's voice trembled, but she held on to the edge of the conversation. "How far does this go?" Angela took a deep breath before speaking again. "We're talking about a network of officers, people who use their positions of power to protect each other. But we've got something now. We have evidence that will bring them down, all of them." Kendra's heart began to race. This was it, the opening she had been waiting for. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was a chance to take down the entire corrupt system that had claimed her brother's life, and so many others. "What do you need me to do?" Kendra asked, her resolve strengthening. "What's the next step?" "We need your help in the next stage of the investigation. We'll need to move fast, and we'll need to be careful," Angela replied, her voice turning serious. "But we're in this together. We're going to make sure Sloane and everyone else involved faces the consequences of their actions." Kendra's fingers gripped the phone tightly as she listened. The next step was dangerous, but it was also the only way to make sure this didn't happen again. She couldn't let them win, not after everything she had seen, everything she had learned. Jamal deserved better, and she would make sure he got it. "Okay, Angela, I'm in. Let's do this." Kendra's voice was firm, no trace of hesitation. This was her fight now. This was her chance to make sure that her brother's death wouldn't be forgotten. That night, as the investigation took a new turn, Kendra couldn't sleep. The anger that had once burned in her veins had evolved into something colder, more focused. It was no longer about just getting revenge on Sloane. It was about breaking the system that had allowed this to happen over and over again. Her phone buzzed in the middle of the night, and she immediately grabbed it. A message from Marcus popped up on her screen. "We have confirmation. Sloane's network is bigger than we thought. We're moving forward with the plan. Tomorrow. Are you ready?" Kendra didn't hesitate. She typed back quickly. "Ready." She stood by her window, looking out at the quiet city streets, the same streets where she had grown up, where her brother had grown up, where her family had lived and loved. But the city wasn't just hers. It was part of a bigger system, and that system had taken her brother's life. She had to change it. It was her only option, for Jamal, for herself, for every person who had been mistreated, underestimated, and silenced. The night seemed still, but Kendra could feel the storm building. Tomorrow, everything would change. The next morning, Kendra arrived at the law office, the place where Marcus and his team were putting the final touches on their case. The air was thick with anticipation. Marcus was sitting at his desk, a series of documents spread out in front of him. He looked up as Kendra walked in. This is it. He didn't say it like he was nervous or unsure. He said it like it was a fact, something that had been set in motion long before they even walked through that door. Kendra nodded, taking a seat. What's the plan? Marcus leaned forward, his fingers tapping the table. We go public. We expose everything. Sloan, his network, the officers involved in this. It's time to hold them accountable. Kendra felt a chill run down her spine. This was the moment they had been preparing for. She had no idea what the consequences would be, but there was no turning back now. They were going to take Sloan down, and nothing was going to stop them. The days that followed were a whirlwind of press conferences, legal filings, and rallies. Kendra had taken the fight public. There was no turning back now. The world had seen what happened to Jamal, and the world was demanding answers. Kendra and Marcus worked tirelessly, putting together the case against Officer Sloan and the network of officers who had enabled him. They had gathered eyewitness accounts, phone records, surveillance footage, all the pieces they needed to expose the corruption within the police force. It wasn't just about Sloan anymore. This was about the system, a system that had allowed this kind of violence to go unchecked for too long. The media coverage was intense. News outlets picked up the story, and protests erupted outside police headquarters. People were angry. People were fed up. Kendra's story had become a symbol for so many others who had faced the same injustices. The trial was set to begin in a week, but Kendra knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be long and filled with challenges. She couldn't afford to be complacent. She had to stay vigilant. One morning, as Kendra sat with Marcus reviewing the final details of the case, a reporter approached them with a microphone. "Miss Woods, what's next after the trial? Do you feel confident that justice will be served?" Kendra looked the reporter in the eye, her gaze steady and unflinching. Justice doesn't just come in the form of a verdict. It's about changing the system, making sure that what happened to my brother doesn't happen to anyone else. This fight isn't over. It's just beginning. The reporter nodded, writing down her words, but for Kendra, it was more than just a statement. It was a promise. She wasn't just fighting for her brother's death to be acknowledged. She was fighting to make sure that no more lives would be stolen in the same way. The day of the trial arrived, and the courtroom was packed. Reporters, activists, and families of victims all gathered to witness what was expected to be a historic trial. Kendra walked into the courtroom, her head held high. She wasn't just there to seek justice for Jamal. She was there to hold the entire system accountable. As the trial began, Kendra sat in the front row, her eyes locked on Officer Sloan, who sat stoically at the defense table. Sloan was no longer the powerful officer who had terrorized the streets. Now he was just a man who had destroyed a family and broken the trust of an entire community. The prosecution's case was airtight. They presented evidence that proved Sloan's history of misconduct, his pattern of racial profiling, and his complete disregard for human life. They brought forward the testimony of witnesses who had seen the incident firsthand, each one confirming that the raid had been unjustified and dangerous. The defense tried to paint Sloan as a victim, someone who had been forced to act out of self-defense, but the jury wasn't buying it. Kendra's heart raced as the closing arguments began. She knew they had done everything they could. The rest was in the hands of the jury. The hours that followed felt like days. Kendra sat nervously, her hands clenched into fists as the jury deliberated. She couldn't help but replay the moment in her mind, the moment she had walked into that police station, the moment she had faced Sloan. But now, as she sat there, she knew that this wasn't just about revenge. It was about truth. It was about ensuring that Alyssa, Jamal, and all the others who had been wronged by the system would never be forgotten. Finally, the jury returned to the courtroom. Kendra's heart stopped. The room fell silent, every eye on the jury as they handed the verdict to the judge. The judge unsealed the envelope and looked at the jury. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Officer Richard Sloan, guilty of involuntary manslaughter in the death of Jamal Woods." A collective breath was released from the courtroom, but it wasn't a moment of celebration. It wasn't an overwhelming sense of victory. The weight of what had just happened, the life that had been lost, the damage done, was still too heavy. Sloan stood up, his face pale. The reality of the guilty verdict had finally settled in. He had been part of a system that believed it could act above the law, But now he was going to pay the price. For the first time, he was forced to face the consequences of his actions. Kendra stood from her seat, her head high, her chest full of pride. She had done it. She had brought justice to her brother. But she knew this wasn't just about her victory. This was about every person who had suffered at the hands of a broken system. This was about making sure that no one else would have to endure what she had. As Kendra walked out of the courtroom, she felt a mix of emotions. Relief, yes. Pride, for sure. But there was also a sense of bitterness. Because the truth was, nothing could bring Jamal back. Nothing would heal the hole in her heart. But she had made her brother proud, and she had changed something, for the better. The fight wasn't over. But Kendra knew now that the world was starting to change. Justice had been served, and she was ready for whatever came next.